Trump's peace plan for Gaza, a blueprint for control, not sovereignty. Donald Trump's so-called 20-point plan for Gaza, celebrated by Benjamin Netanyahu and cautiously acknowledged by Hamas under pressure of siege and destruction, has been presented to the world as a pathway to peace. In reality, it is nothing of the sort. It is a political trick dressed as diplomacy, a recipe for stripping Palestinians of their sovereignty, neutralizing their resistance, and placing Gaza under foreign management with Donald J. Trump himself arrogantly installed as the overseer. This plan is not about peace. It is about domination. It is about erasing Palestinian identity and statehood under the disguise of development and stability. Let us look at why this proposal is not only ridiculous but dangerous. 1. De-radicalized terror-free zone, the language of colonial occupation. The very first point frames Gaza as a land of terrorism that must be de-radicalized. But who decides what radical means? For Israel and its backers, any Palestinian who demands freedom, sovereignty, or the right to return is a terrorist. By defining Gaza this way, Trump's plan delegitimized Palestinian resistance to decades of blockade, occupation, and apartheid before any negotiation even begins. A peace plan that starts by branding an entire people as radicals is not peace. It is collective criminalization. 2. Redevelopment without sovereignty is just modern-day colonialism. The plan speaks about redeveloping Gaza and investing billions into its economy. But development imposed by occupiers and overseen by foreign powers is not liberation. It is dependency. It is the same formula colonial empires used. Exploit a people, destroy their economy, then redevelop it under outside control while denying them political rights. Palestinians do not need Trump or Tony Blair to rebuild their lives. They need their freedom, borders, and resources returned. 3. The hostage prisoner swap. Lives turned into bargaining chips. While the release of hostages is crucial, the plan makes a grotesque equivalence between a few dozen Israeli hostages and thousands of Palestinians imprisoned, often without trial, including children. It even reduces the bodies of the dead to a 15-to-1 exchange rate. This is not justice. This is the cold arithmetic of occupation. It treats Palestinians not as human beings but as numbers to be bartered. 4. Amnesty for Hamas fighters but only if they disarm and vanish. The proposal dangles amnesty for Hamas members but only if they surrender their weapons and leave Gaza or pledge loyalty to a foreign supervised order. This is not reconciliation. It is forced political cleansing. No national movement in history has achieved freedom by disarming under the watchful eye of its occupiers. 5. Aid as blackmail. Humanitarian aid is presented as a reward for compliance. Palestinians in Gaza are starving not because they cannot feed themselves, but because Israel and its allies have deliberately blockaded food, fuel, and medicine. Under this plan, aid flows not as a right, but as a tool of blackmail. Behave as Washington and Tel Aviv demand or starve. 6. A board of peace chaired by Donald Trump, an insult. The most absurd and insulting element of the plan is the creation of a so-called board of peace, chaired by Donald Trump himself and including Tony Blair, whose disastrous legacy in Iraq and complicity with U.S. wars disqualifies him from any moral role in peacemaking. This is not peacekeeping. This is the recolonization of Gaza under the egos of failed Western politicians. The fact that Trump imagines himself the governor of Gaza is not only arrogant, it is obscene. 7. Demilitarization under foreign monitors, stripping Palestinians of defense. The plan demands complete demilitarization of Gaza under the eyes of independent monitors, while Israel remains a heavily armed nuclear power. Palestinians are told they may live, but without the right to defend themselves. This is not peace, it is permanent submission. History shows, no people has ever been freed by disarming under foreign occupation. 8. International Stabilization Force, an occupation by another name. Trump's plan proposes a multinational international stabilization force to police Gaza, working with Israel and Egypt to control borders. This would replace one occupation with another, putting foreign boots on Palestinian soil indefinitely. Palestinians would not govern themselves, they would be policed by outsiders. 9. The false promise of statehood, someday. As always, the promise of Palestinian statehood is pushed into the distant future, conditional on reforms, compliance, and the dismantling of resistance. Point 19 cynically dangles the aspiration of Palestinian self-determination as a vague possibility after Gaza is rebuilt under foreign control. This is the same lie Palestinians have heard for decades. Wait, obey, comply, and maybe one day you will be allowed to exist. 10. A peace plan that denies the word Palestine. Most strikingly, this entire proposal never once recognizes the Palestinians as a sovereign people with a right to an independent state. Gaza is spoken of as a zone, as a problem to be managed, as a place for technocrats to experiment with governance. But never as a nation entitled to dignity, borders, and freedom. The Palestinian right to sovereignty. Palestinians do not need Trump's plan. They do not need a board of peace. They do not need an economic miracle imposed by foreign billionaires. They need what every other people on earth is entitled to. Full sovereignty over their land, air, and sea. The right to self-determination and independent governance. Control of their borders, resources, and future. The right to resist occupation as enshrined in international law. Justice for decades of dispossession, killings, and apartheid. Anything less is not peace. It is slavery dressed in golden words. Conclusion. A recycled colonial fantasy. Trump's 20-point plan is nothing but a recycled colonial fantasy, dressed up with glossy promises of aid and infrastructure. It denies Palestinians sovereignty, erases their identity, and subjects them once again to foreign governors and military control. Peace cannot be imposed by those who profit from war. Peace cannot be dictated by occupiers and their allies. And peace certainly cannot be built on the condition that Palestinians surrender their right to exist as a sovereign nation. The only path to true peace is simple. End the occupation. Lift the siege. Recognize Palestine as a free, sovereign state. Until then, every so-called peace plan is just another attempt to manage the conflict while burying Palestinian aspirations under concrete, checkpoints, and foreign rule.